Alrighty, hello everybody and welcome to the channel. I had to do a lot of setting up today. Alrighty. There we go. Sorry. Having my phone out again so I can watch the comments while I go. So, as I have announced on Twitter, today our Monday stream is going to be all about the late, great Steve Ditko. You may know him as the co-creator of Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. He's done a bunch of other stuff throughout his career. And yeah, we're just going to go through his career, go through a couple of videos about him. I was hoping to get some interviews of him. I have a couple of articles where it was like pieced together interviews, and another is like, okay. So outside of Ditko being the famous Marvel artist, he's also known for being very evasive to any sort of public attention. He is basically known for being a hermit. He did not like being in the public eye at all. So therefore, trying to find stuff where he is actively talking about his work or giving an interview with people is tricky, and you're more likely going to hear other people talking about him more than you're going to hear him talking about himself. And it's very frustrating from a historical standpoint, but I think I speak for all comic book fans, or we've just kind of accepted that that's Ditko for you. So we're going to do our best today to piece together what we can with him, and I'm not sure how you guys feel about this, because I personally like starting with the Wikipedia article because it is the most condensed info that we've got. But we'll start from here. As you know, born November 2nd, 1927 to 2018, so relatively recently. Alright, comic book artist, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange. And Ditko studied under Batman artist Jerry Robinson at the Cartoonist Illustrator School in New York City, and began his professional career in 1953. It's honestly kind of crazy to know just, like, how young was he? 1953. Sorry, I'm trying to do math on this here. So he was actually pretty late into his career. I'm so used to hearing stories about, oh yeah, he was in like his teen years or his mid-20s when it comes to like the older artists, but he actually got started a little later in his life. But I don't know. Working in the studio of Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, began as an inker and coming under the influence of artist Mort Meskin. Now, who is this guy? Alright, so he's another artist. Well, let me know if you guys see any names in this biography, or any names you would like me to, or any people you would like me to cover in the future. Alright. And a lot associated with Charleston Comics, which would eventually become, well, kinda, sort of, become Marvel Comics. Marvel Comics is kind of a weird origin story in and of itself, because it's like, it was Atlas, and a bunch of other companies got smushed together, and boom, here we go. Alright, now as we can see here, notable works about Spider-Man, Doctor Strange. One that I did not know, or two I did not know, was Creeper and Hawk and Dove. I mean, now that I'm looking at him, it's like, oh yeah, I guess that does make sense. And Creeper does have that similar thing to the Question, where he dons like this, well, I forget what the Creeper's big thing was. I'm just used to the Batman animated version of him, but I know that's very different from his origin story, like most comic book characters. And Hawk and Dove, looking back on it and knowing what we know about Ditko when it comes to his life philosophy, we'll get into that later. It's like, okay, yeah, that makes sense a little bit. Slightly more famously, Mr. A and the Question, and I say slightly more famously because obviously people mostly know him for Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. However, when it comes to internal-ish influence for the later generations, I think Mr. A and Question do have more of an influence in that realm. And when I say that, Mr. A inspired Rorschach from Watchmen. Alan Moore was basically doing a very, I don't know if, would you say mean-spirited take on Mr. A? I want to say tongue-in-cheek because Alan Moore has been very open about the fact of his feelings of Rorschach and the people who love Rorschach. But Mr. A influenced Rorschach, and in turn, Rorschach influenced a lot of other comic book creators. So that's why I'm saying Mr. A and the Question were like internally more influential because of their archetypes and how they influenced the next generation, which went on to influence the next generation. All right. We also got Captain Atom, we got Blue Beetle, and Nightshade. Okay, I am going to need a little bit more of a refresher of Nightshade. Oh, her. Okay. Sometimes I get superhero names mixed up in my head, so I was thinking that for some reason I was thinking of Black Orchid, that superhero, but obviously not that. All right. Ditko began contributing small independent publishers where he created Mr. A hero reflecting the influence of Ayn Rand's philosophy of objectivism. Yeah, there we go. He is very big into objectivism, which is slightly funny, considering that a good number of his characters are vigilantes, which kind of skirt on the moral line a teeny bit. It's like, yeah, they're doing the right thing, but also technically they're breaking the law. And Ditko largely declined to give interviews, saying he preferred to communicate through his work. Which is, like, appreciated, but also, could you, like, I don't know, go in a little more detail on, like, your work process? You know, for the future artists who might want to know. I don't know. I do respect that he valued his privacy a lot. Like, he seems like a guy where he very much values his privacy, and it's like, I do get it, because let's be real, sometimes fans can get a little pushy sometimes, and this is him just preemptively being like, nope, and keeping everyone at arm's length. Alright, Ditko was inducted in the comics industry Jack Kirby Hall of Fame in 1990 and into the Will Eisner Award Hall of Fame in 1994. In 2024, Ditko was named a Disney legend for his contributions to publishing. Interesting that Disney would be the one to do that. Well, Disney owns Spider-Man now, so okay, whatever. So there's a little bit of a base background information that we can work on. And again, and like I said, trying to find an interview with Steve Ditko, yeah, not gonna happen. So, but I did do some preemptive searching, and I found this article that was published a year after his death. And it's titled Steve Ditko Speaks from 1968 from the 13th Dimension, Comic Creators and Culture. Alright, Ditko. Here we go at age 90, and Roy Thomas's alter ego has dedicated its upcoming issue to the elusive an inscrutable comics titan. Issue 160, due August 14th, from publisher Tomorrow's, jam-packed with features tributes to artists who created or co-created Doctor Strange, the Creeper, the Question, Mr. Ray, Hawk and Dove, and so much more. Like, Spider-Man. Okay, so this is going to be like a snippet from the alter ego number 160. Violent Minds. Alright, 3 of those fans, Mike and Richard Hallwell and Mark Canterbury, managed to wrangle a mail interview with the famous tight-lipped Ditko back in 1968 for the fanzine Marvel Maine. The whole thing is reprinted in Alter Ego number 160, and we got an exclusive excerpt for you right here. Actually, we're just showing one question, no pun intended, and one answer, because it's this exchange that gets to the heart of what Ditko longed to convey through his art. Alright, and it looks like we can grab a copy of the entire issue right here. So I'm going to put a link to this article down below so you can come check this out for yourselves. All right. Mike Hallwell. All right. Out of all the characters you have created, which is the best extension of your thoughts and beliefs? Why? And Ditko says, The Question, and Mr. A. I can't seem to separate the two. I mean, I've seen a bit of Ditko's Question. I have not read Mr. A, but I do find it very funny that even he can't tell the difference between the two characters. Why? They are positive characters, not negative. They stand for something. They know what they stand for and why they must make that stand. They are not just against something. Every criminal in the world is opposed to him being robbed or murdered, but do these criminals stand for justice? Being against something isn't enough. I do agree with that. A lot of people think that, if you're just against something, that means you stand for something. But there is a difference between standing for something and standing against something. But anyway, continue. Every person, whether he wants to be or not, is in a continuous struggle. It's not a physical life or death struggle, yet it's a threat to every man's survival. No man has to battle or fear the supernatural. It doesn't exist. Very funny coming from the co-creator of Doctor Strange. All right. No man has to fight or fear creatures from outer space. No man has to battle foreign enemies. Or armies. I mean, getting into semantics there. The country's armed forces are prepared for that possibility. A man's battle isn't against foreign conspiracies. The FBI and CIA are set up and equipped to deal with that threat. The police are equipped to deal with crime. Health problems are battled by the medical profession. Against any of the above dangers, no man has to face them alone. But in that one continuous struggle, man has to constantly face the danger alone. No one can face it or fight it for him. It is the struggle for his mind. It is the struggle against everyone he comes in contact with. It is a struggle to keep his mind from being corrupted and being ruled by irrational premises. I mean, yeah, that... Oh, here we go. A little panel of Mr. A. Yeah, there is something to that, too. It's like that saying, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. Or you can't help somebody who doesn't want to be helped. When it comes to having a morality and making moral decisions that only the individual can make, somebody can't come in and make those decisions for you. You have to be the one to make those right decisions by yourself. The government can't come in and make it for you. It's nothing to do with like big problems like war, but when it comes to like everyday moral actions, you have to actively make the choice to be moral. So I think that's what he's getting for here. Let's see if we can read some of this Mr. A. Fools will tell you that there can be no honest person, that there are no blacks or whites, that everyone is gray. But if there are no blacks or whites, there cannot even be a gray, since grayness is just a mixture of black and white. What is white? Good. There can be no justification for choosing any part of evil. Those who do so choose are not gray, but black and evil, and they will be treated accordingly. I do appreciate him taking firm stances, but I will argue that there is such a thing as a gray area when it comes to very, very specific bits of morality. For example, the morality of killing in self-defense. There are some people who are like, yeah, that's perfectly fine. And there are some people who are like, no, you should never do that. You should always find a way to do it without committing, the greatest crime. But I don't know. It's just, objectivism for me is like any other philosophy where there are a lot of it. There's a lot of the philosophy where it makes sense to me, but there's also some holes in it where it's like, I don't know about that. And the same is with objectivism. The same is with Ayn Rand. And especially with Ayn Rand, it's like, I get where she is coming from. She escaped Russia when communism was taking over, and she was surrounded by people who were being basically led by their like wants and emotions, and she was just completely against that. And her whole philosophy is just like, no, I don't want anything to do with that. And it's like, I get it, but at the same time, there are some holes in that philosophy too. All right, back to the interview with Ditko. A man is what he stands for. Why is it right to stand for it and to protect and defend it all the time? In the struggle, a man can lose only if he gives in, defeated by self-destruction, by accepting the wrong as right, to act against himself. Honest men, like dishonest men, are made. The honest refuse to accept wrong as right. The dishonest refuse to accept right as right. Each deliberately makes a choice. The struggle is not openly recognized. Accepting lies, dishonesty, etc., or practicing in visions, etc., are not criminal acts. Nothing but a man's own mind can protect him from accepting and practicing the irrational and suffering from its corrupting effects. But a man has to choose to do it. This is the premise that the question and Mr. A are based on. Evil is powerless. A mind that refuses to accept or defend the truth by that act permits lies to exist, to give them respectability and influence, thereby undercutting and eventually destroying everything that is of real value. Destroyed not by the power of evil, but by the good's refusal to protect itself against an enemy that could exist only with good's permission. A man's refusal to understand the issue changes nothing. If a man doesn't know why a thing is right or wrong, he has no defenses. He's vulnerable. He has no standard by which to measure, accept or reject any proposition. The question in Mr. A are men who chose to know what is right and act accordingly at all times. Everyone should. And, that's the end of the article. Okie dokie.
looks like they got a few other links here that you guys can check out in your own time. Oh boy, Ditko would absolutely hate the state of comic book morality right now. Where it's like, oh, the villains weren't really villains. They were just misunderstood this whole time. Or, oh, what if the good guys were actually bad? Maybe their philosophy is actually bad. And it's like, the hero is literally doing everything he can. How is this philosophy bad? Yeah, I honestly would love to hear Ditko's opinions about modern comic book writing, because oh my god, he would probably have an aneurysm dealing with some of the comic book prose nowadays. But again, 13th Dimension, I probably should at least showcase some of his art before we get too into it, because we talked a little bit about his philosophy. All right, let's see if we can make that. Ouch, stop it. Let's see if we can make that a little bit bigger. But yeah, this is classic Ditko art right here. There's like a very, it's a very weird mixture of fluidity, but also sturdiness, if that makes sense. Because like clearly he knows how to draw your eye to all different things going on around him, and everything looks all swirly and what the heck is going on, it's chaos, but it also feels very like grounded and it's real. And then of course you got Mr. A right here, who's walking down the long white path. A is A. Mr. A is A. A thing is what it is. No man can have it both ways. Only through black and white principles can man distinguish between good and evil. The principles guide man's basic choice of actions. Men can attempt to choose contradictions, gray principles, like men can choose to be dishonest, corrupt. But that choice only leads to evil, to self-destruction. Yep, that's Ditko right there. And we got a few other ones. I wonder... Oh, yeah. Shade the Changing Man. I have not read Ditko's Shade the Changing Man like a newbie. I have read the Peter Milligan run, and I have the Peter Milligan run in my long box right now. And it's got some good stories in it, though it definitely goes off the rails towards the end. And there are some loving tributes to the Ditko version. For example, I know in the Milligan version you're used to seeing him in that colorful cloak with the long hair. However, it does make a point to say that the M-Vest is the actual M-Vest from the original Ditko version here. Like, you see how the M-Vest looks like that. And actually, when they came out with Shade the Changing Girl a few years ago, because, ooh, he's a girl now, which, if you read the Milligan run, you know that is not new at all. Okay. I don't want to get too into that, because it explaining the Milligan Shade the Changing Man is wacky bonkers. But anyway, I immediately noped out of that series when I was flipping through the first issue. And the Changing Girl, like, she was this weird bird thing. I don't know why. But she's like, oh yeah, Shade the Changing Man. And look, here is his M-Vest. And it held up the super colorful cloak that you recognize from the Milligan version. And I immediately thought that's not the M-Vest. Because in the Milligan run, they make it clear that while Shade was in his own universe, he agreed to be part of his government's experiments to travel into, like, the madness world. And in order for him to exist in that world without going crazy himself or dying, he had to wear an M-Vest. And the M-Vest that was on his physical body looked like the original N-Vest from the Ditko version, and he would basically project his conscious onto someone in our world in order to exist within our world. So I know that sounds very complicated. It is a very wacky series to summarize. And the costume that you see him in, the iconic Milligan shade costume, that was him using his powers of the M-Vest, that again is on his physical body, floating around in the Madnessverse. He's using the power of the M-Vest to project those clothes onto him while he is in our world. That cloak is not the M-Vest. The M-Vest is is the Ditko version. Alright, so I believe before we get into this interview, we should probably talk about like the big controversial, I wouldn't say controversial, but it's a highly debated issue to this day because nobody really knows the facts about what the heck was going on. But the big question of why did Ditko leave Marvel Comics? Because the official version for a very long time is he just came in, handed in his final work, and resigned. Like, no ifs, ands, or buts, and he was just like, peace, I'm out. Which I guess kind of goes along with what we know about him. He does seem like the type of guy where he's like, you know what, I've made up my mind, I'm leaving, so peace. But the bigger question is, okay, why? Why would you give up this career? So I pulled up this article here. He said, she said, why Ditko left Marvel, from sciencefiction.com. This was posted 2017. All right, so introductory paragraph. Why did Ditko leave? Question that fans of pop culture historians have been puzzling over for half a century now. As the story goes, the artist simply came into the Marvel office one day, handed in his completed assignments, and announced his resignation. Stanley recently as in this probably happened in 2016, Stanley recently spoke on the subject during a panel at the Wizard World Nashville convention, as covered by my friend and colleague, Tony Schaub. You can find links for full remarks in Tony's article. Okay, so if you want to go look at Tony's article, there's that. But in short, his version of events is that it was sparked by a dispute over how to handle the reveal of the Green Goblin's identity. Okay. A mystery which had been building for 2 years at this point. According to Lee, he wanted to reveal the Goblin as the father of Harry Osborn, who had recently been introduced as one of Peter Parker's college classmates. Ditko, on the other hand, wanted the Goblin to be just some guy, reasoning that in real life sometimes the villain is a nobody that you've never heard of before. To quote Stan, "Since I was the editor, I did it my way." Okay, Stan. Thus, Ditko is generally considered to have resigned in protest. I don't believe that. I mean, I believe Ditko was not happy about the decision, but come on. That seems like that's only like a fraction of the story. Maybe it was like, because you don't just quit for something like that. I mean, artists all the time don't agree with what their writers want in a story. And they don't just quit willy-nilly. Mostly because they have to make a living. But I feel this does feel like there are some holes in this story here. But I guess I will pose this question to you guys. Would you have preferred the Green Goblin to be just a random guy? Because I've always just grown up that it was Norman Osborn. Like, that's just the Green Goblin for me. That it was always him for me. But that's because I was born in 1995, and it has well been established at that point But what do you guys prefer? Do you guys prefer it to be Norman Osborn, or do you think it could have worked a little bit better if it was just some random nobody? Or maybe a different character in the Spider-Man universe? Let me know in the comments. Alright. If you're a Spider-Man fan, that story probably sounds familiar. After all, it represents the conventional wisdom on the subject. At the very least, it's the closest thing to an explanation that fans have ever had. And it certainly fits with what comic fans know of Ditko, who has a reputation for being remarkably uncompromising where creative matters are concerned. Didn't Kirby also sort of rage quit Marvel? Because, look, I do love Stan Lee, but he did clash with quite a few of the OG Marvel founders. So again, that's why that's based off the knowledge that I know. So that's why that story, it seems like I don't think it was just that. I don't think it was just the Green Goblin. But of course, things are never that simple. Ditko is legendarily evasive when it comes to publicity, described variously as intensely private or even reclusive. Ditko prefers to avoid public appearances or statements and never grants interviews. However, except for when fans tease it out of him through letters. However, over the years, he has at times made allusions to his departure from Marvel, both in his recent comics and in essays published in fanzines. While Ditko's writings can often be impenetrable to those who aren't accustomed to his unique style, he seems to chalk his departure up to a souring of his relationship with Lee, at least to whatever limited extent he's willing to publicly acknowledge. Indeed, as one might expect of Ditko, he has studiously avoided going into any particular detail. However, he has over the years made claims that directly contradicted Lee's version of events. Specifically, Ditko has asserted that not only was the Osborn reveal his idea, but that he introduced a character, seen below, who was intended to be Norman Osborn in scenes set in J. Jonah Jameson's business club, beginning in Amazing Spider-Man number 23. So that guy was supposed to be Norman is that Norman Osborn there? Okay. Alright. That character returned in a number of subsequent issues, including the 2-issue Crime Master storyline, which ran through issues 26 and 27. Now, compare that fellow to Norman Osborn as drawn by Ditko himself for his official first appearance in Amazing Spider-Man number 37, and note that Harry Osborn, also pictured, had first appeared 6 issues earlier, placing his introduction at a midpoint between the Crime Master story and his father's debut. I gotta take a little sip here. On top of all, Norman Osborn also appeared the following month in Amazing Spider-Man number 38, which would ultimately be Ditko's final issue. Whether or not you believe that Ditko intended Osborn to be the Goblin, both of these early appearances make it explicit that he is anything but a model citizen. In either case, Osborn would be revealed as the Green Goblin in Amazing Spider-Man number 39, the very next issue, and the first to be penciled by John Romita. On top of all that, but it's also worth pointing out that the reveal of a villain as just some guy had already been done for the conclusion of the Crime Master story in Amazing Spider-Man number 27. Further, each of Osborn's pre-Amazing Spider-Man 37 cameos took place in stories that featured the Green Goblin. That includes both the Crime Master arc and the original cameo in Amazing Spider-Man number 23. which featured a story titled The Goblin and the Gangsters. Coincidence? It's certainly possible. Osborne could well have been intended to simply be a shady businessman. After all, it would certainly fit with Ditko's interest in street-level noir-style stories. But there's plenty of circumstantial evidence to support Ditko's claim that he intended for Osborne to be revealed as the Goblin. And while it's certainly possible that the split involved a creative dispute, Goblin-related or otherwise, I very much doubt that's the whole story. It's fairly well known in Spire fandom that Lee and Ditko were not on speaking terms with one another for roughly the last year I'm guessing that's supposed to be the last year or so of their collaboration. So whichever straw it was that finally broke the camel's back, it was clearly a long time coming. Yeah, I have read a few Stan Lee stories, and Stan Lee tends to lean more on the cheesier side of comic book writing, whereas Ditko seems to be very much the straight and narrow. So I can definitely buy that it was a clash of creative differences. It's just the Goblin story where it's like, oh, it was just this one decision and all of a sudden he didn't want to work anymore. I do not believe that in the slightest. It was most likely just they kept butting heads and the Goblin dispute was the final straw. So that's how I'm interpreting this situation. You guys let me know in the comments how you figure this situation. Though one does not want to look for creative differences between Lee and Ditko, this period, in which Ditko had a much greater influence over the plot and tone of the book, may hold the key. Throughout the later portion of the Lee Ditko run, the tone of the Amazing Spider-Man grew increasingly angry and hostile, with Peter Parker alienating himself from everyone around him. It's an anger that you'll instantly recognize if you've ever read any of Ditko's creator-owned work, such as Mr. A. Again, Mr. A just keeps popping up in these things. It's a noticeable shift from earlier issues, and to be blunt, it frequently made the book an unpleasant thing to read. Likewise, it's not an accident that Rometta's first issue is basically an apology tour, which depicts the Green Goblin scheming while Peter Parker visits each member of his supporting cast one by one to kiss and make up. More than likely, though, the differences that dissolved the partnership were as much personal as creative. Indeed, based on what is publicly known of the two men, it is perhaps not so surprising that the relationship eventually deteriorated. Lee's a bombastic personality that has never shielded away from the spotlight, while Ditko is anything but. Lee's politics generally lean liberal, while Ditko is an inherent follower of objectivism, a brand of conservative philosophy espoused by Ayn Rand. Variety may be the spice of life, but sometimes personal differences simply prove insurmountable. Which, yeah, I think it really is just at the end of the day, the creative differences between the two were just too much. And you know what? It happens. This happens all the time in the creative sphere. I have stopped a pretty big collaboration in my own personal writing career because, well, it wasn't just the creative differences. There was a whole bunch of other shit going on behind the scenes. But it's like, I get it. Like, look, you work with someone and sometimes it just does not work out. It happens. Gotta light another thing on fire here. Come on, catch on fire. The one very funny tidbit about Ditko when it comes to his art, let me bring it up. It's mostly with his Doctor Strange artwork. Now, if you've seen, if you know Doctor Strange, he's Sorcerer Supreme. He goes through all sorts of wacky mystic adventures. And if you've seen the art of Doctor Strange, it is very much abstract, super colorful. And this is classic Ditko. Well, I've heard that apparently quite a few stoners really loved Doctor Strange when it came out, and they really loved the art, and apparently they wrote to Marvel expressing how much they loved how trippy the artwork is, and Ditko got very angry and annoyed by all the stoners being like, yeah, man, your art's so cool, man. I'm gonna spray paint it on my van, man. Which, again, it's very funny to think about, both in the fact that a bunch of stoners just loved this artwork by this guy who is very much on the straight and narrow, and the fact that Ditko kept getting all these letters from stoners praising his artwork. I don't know if he would have mixed feelings about it or if he would be pissed about it. I don't even know if that story is inherently true. That's just what I have heard around the comic shops over the years. I don't know if we'll be able to get into this article too much. It's one that I found. There's also a video on YouTube. It's a Steve Ditko biographical interview with Pat and Patrick Ditko. They're two relatives of Steve Ditko. Pat is Ditko's brother, and Patrick is Ditko's nephew. So the whole thing is almost 2 hours long, so we're not going to watch it. Let's see how long this article is first before we get into it, because I don't want this this thing to be 2 hours long itself. You know what? How about we watch the videos that I have found first, and then we'll see if we can at least skim some of this for some cool answers. But I will link this article down below, and I'll even find the link for the YouTube video down below so you guys can watch this interview himself. I'm sure this is a very informative one, and you can actually see the similarity between the brother and Ditko here. But I'm sure it's going to be very interesting. It's just a little bit too long for this stream. So let's see if we can let's start with, here we go. So speaking of Mr. A again, I stumbled across this, and the title of the video by Carmelodian. Steve Ditko speaks. All right, a section from a 1998 VHS from Rhino Home Videos. Masters of Comic Book Art. The great Steve Ditko speaks about his own work, as well as that of Aristotle and Ayn Rand. So this is going to be him actually speaking on his work. Okay. All right, so this is like actual Steve Ditko's voice here. Interesting.
A is based on Ayn Rand's theory of justice, on Aristotle's law of identity, his definition of man, and his view of art. Aristotle said that art is philosophically more important than history. History tells how men did act. Art shows how men could and should act. Art creates a model, an ideal man as a measuring standard. Without a measuring standard, nothing can be identified or judged. But
I think I would see art more as how we expressed good and evil. I don't think it's like a measure or something to be followed, because in my humble opinion, art imitates life, not the other way around. So art can't push you towards one way or another, but art is a way that we express how we view good and evil.
everything can be measured. Disease and sicknesses are measured by a healthy organ or body. All measurement requires an appropriate standard. With it, one can measure down to atoms, up to the stars, and the changes in the character of a man. Aristotle defined man as a rational animal. Rationality is a potential, that has to be actualized by choice and the right thinking method of logic applied to reason. The standard of measurement for all is a rational logical ruler. It objectively measures the rational and irrational thinking. A hero measures a man at his best in the worst situations. A hero is a man admired for his qualities or achievements and regarded as an ideal or model.
That's another thing with objectivism that I can't quite get behind, because I get it. Yes, you should be acting rationally and you should use logic. However, that's just not how people are. People are not always going to be rational or logical. And you just have to accept that sometimes people get into the mindset that ration and logic will not get through to them as they would if they were of clearer mind. And I don't think that's a character flaw. I just think that sometimes, life hits us like a freight truck, or an event happens that just hits us in the feels, and you just don't act according to what you know should be right or wrong, or is the most logical course of action. Now, sometimes if they dip into like, oh no, my dog died, I should murder someone in response, it's like, okay, yeah, no, that's evil, do not do that. But, maybe advocating for something that you probably shouldn't, just in the heat of the moment, I don't think that's a severe character flaw. It's just you're not acting logically in that moment, which I don't think is inherently a bad thing. It's just you're not in your right mind and you just need to get your head back on right.
Aristotle formulated the law of identity. A is A. A thing is what it is. It has a specific nature and identity. The truth cannot contradict itself and also be a lie. Mr. A's black and white card symbolizes the law of identity. It identifies the two moral potentials possible, the good and the evil, and by one's chosen action, the best or the worst potential can be actualized. The card is also a symbol of justice. For Ayn Rand, justice is objectively identifying a thing for what it is and treating it accordingly. No one gets the unearned. The innocent is not penalized, the guilty is not rewarded. The card is a refusal to violate the root of justice, the law of identity, by a gray compromise, a refusal to sacrifice the good to the evil or to accept any part of the evil as a greater good. Society has its admirable people, its heroes. They are found in all professions. But hidden by the complexities of society, they are not as clearly defined, not as understood, and not as effective model as a story with two opposing forces of right and wrong in a dramatic presentation, revealing the character's choices and actions that identify them and lead to a just ending where the hero and the right view of life wins.
It seems like the flip side of liberal, like, not utopianism, but idealism. It seems like just a very different brand of idealism, where idealism is like, ideally, the good are rewarded, the evil are punished. It's just this one is much more of the more harsher and stricter variant, which is another reason why I kind of push against objectivism. It's like, yes, ideally, we should all be doing the great thing because it's right. Ideally, we should be acting logically. But the world is not ideal. The world is messy. And it's a nice ideal to have. We should all be doing the right thing because it's right. But we don't. Because we're humans. And we're flawed. Because that stupid woman ate the stupid apple off the tree because the stupid snake told her to.
Early comic book heroes were not about life as it is, but creations of how a man with a clear understanding of right and wrong and more courage chose to act, even if branded an outlaw. He dispensed a better...
Wait, so that thing is a mask? That's not his actual face? Okay.
...justice than a pervading legal moral one. He was a moral avenger.
Okay. Have any of you read The Ghost of the Badlands by Razorfist? the mask looks somewhat similar to it. It's just darken out the eyes and add in like the squiggles on the mask, and yeah, you got the ghost of the Badland there.
He was not like everyone else, not the average, the common, or the ordinary man. He was the exceptional one, the uncommon one, the one doing what others were unwilling to do, regardless of the opposition and consequences to himself. His success provided a better model.
I don't know why that panel is making me giggle so much. I know nothing. It's Mr. A. Bitch slap. That's a very funny panel.
Through a hero, one could identify the foolish, the corrupt, and the guilty. A lead character can be better or worse than society's best model, and if a man with proven better qualities appears, then a new measuring standard for men and society is established. A hero is a model for everyone, but not everyone is willing to act at his best. A less demanding model, blending good and bad, is more comforting, easier to accept. For the self-flawed, an anti-hero provides a heroic label without the need to act better. A crooked cop, a flawed cop, is not a valid model of a good law enforcer. An anti-cop corrupts the legal good, an anti-hero corrupts the moral good.
Yeah, but it makes good drama.
Both corrupt ideals. Both choose the flaw over the perfect. The perfect is identified and measured by what is possible to man, a perfect bowling score. A perfect response accepts the truth and rejects the lie. The perfect hero on principle says yes to a true identity and no to a
It's a interesting couple of panels to focus in on. We'll have a bondage situation.
contradictory one. Ruled by justice, he treats every identity as it deserves. He is the actualized potential for good in its purest form. A true moral measuring ruler. He is the most human and deserving of respect. Today's flawed superheroes are superior in physical strength, but common, average, ordinary in mental strength. Rich in superpowers, but bankrupt in reasoning powers. They are perfect in overcoming the flawed supervillains, saving the world, the universe, yet helpless to solve their common, ordinary, average personal problems. It is like creating a perfectly physical adult with the reasoning limits of a 6-year-old. The creators of flawed ideals believe that no real difference exists between a flawed hero and a flawed villain. Both have some good and some bad in them, so they blend into a grayness where no one is better than anyone else, and where the worst can justifiably claim that he is as good as gray as the best. If it is impossible to know what is true and to do what is right, then the flaw, the worst, will be the new standard of good. Man will be defined as a flawed, anti-rational animal, and all that corrupts and harms life will be the new virtues. Like deliberately flawed eyesight, where self-blindness is the ideal, anti-life behavior will be the new standard for living. The resentment against the perfect hero is a resentment against A is A, against the integration of truth and behavior, against the non-contradictory identity of a moral ideal.
I have heard that argument before where if you start accepting more of, oh, the hero is just as flawed as the villain, oh, the villain it has just as much good characters as the hero. I have heard that argument before where if you start perpetuating that more and more and more, it moves the morality scale more towards accepting behaviors we probably ought not to accept. Like being explosively violent or being way more sexual than you really ought to be. So I have heard that argument before, where if you don't make a firm stance of what is good and what is evil, you will end up permitting more and more evil because, hey, if you've got just as much flaws in you as your villain, you're basically the same. And I have heard that argument, and that argument has gone into ridiculous extremes. There was this the Amazing Lolly a month ago did a review of Shiki, and if you don't know what Shiki is, give me a second. I'm gonna leave that there. So Shiki is a horror anime, and it's basically a vampire anime. But the whole premise of it is these vampires, they take over an average Japanese town, and they slowly either kill or turn humans into vampires because they want to make their own vampire community. The only problem is many of the vampires are extremely sadistic, and they toy with the humans, they kill off people who just annoyed them in real life, you know how that works. Well, eventually, there's this heel turn in the series where the humans finally get fed up and they purge the vampires from the town, and they are not shying away with how gory it can be. The humans, like, tear the vampires apart, stake them brutally, blood splurting everywhere. But there has been some debate among the fans of, oh, the humans are going too far, oh, the humans are just as bad as the vampires. And the argument that the amazing Lolly made, and quite frankly I made, was, no, they're not. The vampires were the ones who were literally murdering everyone. So why the hell shouldn't the humans defend themselves? Like, why are we permitting the vampires to be doing what they do, but all of a sudden it's wrong when the humans try to fight off the evil that is encroaching in their town? Why is that a bad thing? And while, yeah, the humans do get brutal in their dispatching of the vampires, at the same time, the vampires were being just as, or even more cruel. So it's like, yeah, you have to use force to get rid of the evil in your town. And because they are the bad guys, they are objectively the evil ones. And and the series tries to make you feel sorry for the vampires, make you feel sorry for the poor vampires who are being staked because they murdered all of those villagers. And it's like, are you forgetting the fact that they murdered all of those villagers? And I see this with a whole bunch of other fandoms too, where for some reason they just accept the villain's actions, and the villain's actions are completely okay, but when the hero comes in to try and stop them, and sometimes even permanently stop them, it's all of a sudden a really bad thing. But why? The hero is just trying to stop the evil, and yeah, the hero might have to go through extreme measures just to stop the hero, but why are we all of a sudden mad that good is doing what they have to do to get rid of the evil? Why are we all of a sudden mad about it? I don't know. But don't worry, we're getting right back to, or maybe I'm misinterpreting. Let me know if I'm seeing all of this wrong. Okay, so we got Ditko's words.
Against reality and life's measuring ruler, a rational moral standard.
All right, so that's Ditko speaking on it. All right. So I also found this video of Stan Lee on giving Steve Ditko credit for Spider-Man.
In the past, Stan Lee has often been referred to as the sole creator of Spider-Man, something that has upset the publicity-shy Steve Ditko.
He had complained to me a number of times when there were articles written about Spider-Man which called me the creator of Spider-Man. And I had always thought I was, because I'm the guy who said, I have an idea for a strip called Spider-Man, and so forth.
Steve obviously felt differently, and in 1999, in a small fanzine, he depicted the two sides of the story as he saw it. This is his only known response to the claims that Spider-Man was solely Stan Lee's creation.
Steve had said,
so he did not take it well.
Having an idea is nothing, because until it becomes a physical thing, it's just an idea. And he said it took him to draw the strip and to give it life, so to speak, or to make it actually something tangible. Otherwise, all I had was an idea. So I said to him, well, I think the person with the idea is the person who creates it. And he said, no, because I drew it. Anyway, Steve definitely felt that he was the co-creator of Spider-Man. And that was really, after he said it, and I saw it meant a lot to him, that was fine with me. So I said, fine, I'll tell everybody you're the co-creator. That didn't quite satisfy him, so I sent him a letter. I put it in writing. To whom it may concern, this is to state that I consider Steve Ditko to be the co-creator of Spider-Man along with me. Something like that. And I sent it to him, and I said, you can show this to anybody you want to. And I found out that Steve still objected to that because he felt I used the word consider. I consider Steve to be the co-creator. Apparently, he felt that wasn't definite enough. So at that point, I gave up.
I mean, Ditko was the co-creator, though. A running theme with a lot of, especially some of the, from what I've heard from some of the older creators, the writer very rarely created the whole of the idea for the character. For example, the whole thing with Bob Kane and Bill Finger when it came to creating Batman. Oh, hello. Oh, yes. Steve was the co-creator of the look, and he made the look of Spider-Man. And maybe Stan Lee gave a few ideas to him on, hey, this is kind of what I sort of want him to look like, blah, 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 blah. But Ditko was the one that formed the visuals. He formed the world. And Lee couldn't do it. He's not an artist. He couldn't do all of that, but Ditko could. And Ditko made a massive contribution. So yes, Ditko was the co-creator. I was about to... searching for Ditko. Oh yeah, I saw that searching for Ditko, and I saw it was 60 minutes long, and it's like tempting, but I also want to get into a few other things, and I don't want to just be reacting to just one documentary. But I'll search up the search for Ditko and put it in the links below. I mean, I have to put the link for this video down below anyways. But the other example I'm thinking of who is the contributor, which was a massive debate for years, was Bob King and Bill Finger with Batman. While Bob did have the idea of Batman, when it came to the design of Batman, that was all Bill Finger, because apparently Bob Kane, he wanted Batman to be like in a bright red cape or something like that and have this like garishly clown-looking car. And Bill Finger's like, no. And he redesigned the whole Batman costume and everything because he's like, no, this is going to be the Dark Knight. He is Batman. He is not Clown Man. He is Batman. And so... And even with my own comic, Next Evolution, yes, I wrote the script. It was my idea. I came up with the characters, but when it came to the character designs, that was all Martin. I gave Martin like a few ideas of what I wanted, but he was the one who ultimately came up with the designs and added in a few elements of the comic that I never even came up with, but that was all him. So that's why I consider him to be the co-creator of Next Evolution, which I am still fighting with the frickin' copyright office for, because apparently they cannot accept the fact that technically, yes, I hired him, but he is also the co-creator. Legality is so frustrating sometimes. Alright, let's finish up this segment before we go on to the next video.
I mean, we just, I haven't spoken to him or heard from him since, I don't think.
But do you yourself believe that he co-created it?
I'm willing to say so.
That's not what I'm asking you, Stan.
No, and...
Which is kind of scummy on Stan Lee's part. Love the guy, but that is kind of scummy on his part. The fact that he is just not willing at all to admit that, yes, Ditko did co-create Spider-Man. And I can get why Ditko felt miffed that he just said, I consider him. And it's like, it doesn't matter if you consider him to be the co-creator. He was the co-creator.
That's the best answer I can give you.
So it's a no then, really?
Pardon me?
So it's a no then?
No, I really think the guy who dreamed...
Oh, yeah. You can do an entire documentary about the legalities and the technicalities when it comes to the comic book industry. The one thing that really bothered me, I don't know if you guys remember it, it was this movement a year and a half ago where it says comics broke me, and they were talking about how, wow, the comic industry is so crummy, the contracts are so screwy, they screw over the artists, and they don't consider my ideas to be original, they consider it to be owned by the company. And I'm thinking have you seen comic book history? This isn't new. All of these things are really not new. The comic book industry for decades has been screwing over creators. The most famous example being the creators of Superman, who got royally screwed out of royalties. And it's like, they were the ones who created the character. They were the ones who created this cash cow. And they both ended up penniless by the end of it. And it's really a sad situation. But yeah, Kyle, Stan really does seem to be squirming here, because I get the sense that he figured out a long time ago that he kind of fucked things up with Ditko and Kirby. Because I get the feeling that he realized at some point that he did fuck things up with his former creators, and he probably should have been a little bit more, not lenient, but a little bit more willing to be like, oh yeah, they're my co-creators. Oh yeah, they make Marvel Comics just as much as I do. It's not just me. Even though Stan Lee was the face of Marvel Comics, and everyone is willing to grant him that, he is not the only person there. And I think he realized he made that mistake, but also old habits die hard.
The thing up, created it. You dream it up, and then you give it to anybody to draw it. I mean...
But if it had been drawn differently, it might not have been successful or a hit, I suppose.
Yeah, but then I would have had created something that didn't succeed.
Valid point.
But I don't want
That's
to...
kind of a shit way to put it.
That
Yes.
in this documentary that you're doing, and I'm sorry I said it, because I'm happy to say I consider Steve to be the co-creator.
But you can see...
I think if Steve wants to be called the co-creator, I think he deserves to be called the co-creator, because he had done such a wonderful job.
Stan has told me that he was insistent that on the movies that Steve's name be right alongside his with Spider-Man. So Stan, who to me was a guy who I think unfairly has been kind of seen as a guy who took credit for everything when he had people like Kirby and Ditko working with him. I never saw it that way. I always got the sense when I was reading the books that the two of them were very much in collaboration, and whenever something, again, was plotted by Ditko, it said plotted by Ditko.
And for many a comic book fan, the absolute genius of the Ditko-Lee collaboration was best demonstrated in Spider-Man issue number 33, the final chapter.
Yeah, because there are several comic books where I cannot imagine them being illustrated by anybody else. The one that I can think of off the top of my head is The Long Halloween. Batman, oh, shut up. Oh yeah, Stan Lee was one hell of a salesman. And yeah, he was a good editor. And a lot of people argue that his writing style is too cheesy, and it's like, yeah, but he was also good for laying out like a good plot. Like, he knew how to plot a good story. And yeah. But like Tim Sale's work on The Long Halloween, for example, I do not think I can imagine another artist to do The Long Halloween, because Tim Sale's art just seems so perfect for this story. Or even with like The Killing Joke, you can argue whether or not it's a good story, but it would be a very different story if it didn't have the art that it did. So I feel like the artist should be credited along with the writer for that. Alright, so here's another video I found. This is a channel that I follow on my alt account. Maybe you guys will know of it. Strange Brain Parts. He covers a variety of different comic books, but he will also explore the classics. And this is his video, Ditko, in his own words, Stan Lee and Spider-Man. Oh, I think maybe we should check that out first, because I think this is the one you're talking about here, Kyle. Alan Moore's take on Ditko. Because Alan Moore has made it very clear that he does not like Ditko's politics.
My name is Alan Moore. I am a comic writer and magician living in Northampton.
I think this is also from the In Search of Steve Ditko documentary.
I probably first encountered Steve Ditko's work when I was 7 or 8. I probably wouldn't even have known that it was Steve Ditko at the time. There was a kind of elegance, a tormented elegance to the way that his characters stood, the way that they bent their hands. There was something even in the 9-panel page grids that he used to habitually use that brought a kind of claustrophobia, a kind of paranoia to the work. His characters always looked very highly strung. They always...
That's an interesting way to put it.
looked as if they were on the edge of some kind of revelation or breakdown. There was something a bit feverish about Steve Ditko, and I pursued my love of Ditko well into adulthood, and it became a kind of low-level addiction. Steve Ditko...
Maybe this isn't the clip, because Moore has made it very clear he was not a fan of Ditko. Or at least he wasn't a fan of Ditko's morality.
I've got so much of his DNA in all of the characters that he created. I mean, I know that there were good issues of Spider-Man after he finished the book with issue 35, something like that. I know that John Romita did some very good work on Spider-Man, but I kind of lost interest with the first non-Ditko issue because the character was so much a part of Ditko's world that it looked kind of dull when it was an ordinarily muscled man in a Spider-Man costume. And Steve Ditko, as far as I understood it, has lived in some very reduced circumstances throughout his life. When Marvel have been raking in money hand over fist with characters that he created or co-created, but which essentially, in my heart, were Steve Ditko creations. When I was...
Yeah, it seems like some people prefer Ditko, some people prefer Romita, or I hope that's how you pronounce his last name. I am terrible with pronouncing names. I've heard it back and forth. Some people prefer it where it has that neurotic edge, and some people prefer it the lighter Spidey. I can see both sides. I mean, I guess I shouldn't speak too much about Spider-Man specifically. This is probably going to get me some heat, but I have very neutral feelings about Spider-Man. I don't hate the character, but I have very... and I've had some good experiences watching, like, the early Spider-Man movies and some Spider-Man cartoons, and one of my favorite comics, like superhero comics, is Kraven's Last Hunt, which is a fantastic story in my opinion. But he wasn't like super integral to my childhood, so I'm not like a super fan of Spider-Man. I'm just very neutral on the character. I will acknowledge that Spider-Man is an important character, and I do like a few stories that have Spider-Man in it, or star Spider-Man even. But it's like I don't generally gravitate toward Spider-Man stuff. So I know I have not read Ditko's Doctor Strange, to be honest. I feel like I should, because it does look like it has some very cool art. And I also need to read Ditko's Shade the Changing Man, because I think I started reading his Shade the Changing Man, but I stopped for some reason. I don't know why. There's a lot of Ditko stuff I need to read. Holy crap. Because sitting on my shelf right now, I have the Denny O'Neil question run, the first of the omnibuses, but I probably should read some of the Ditko question too. Because if I understand, they're very different takes on the character. And I initially did not particularly like the Denny O'Neil. Has that dark vibe. Which one? The Denny O'Neil question, or are we talking about Doctor Strange Ditko? I don't know if I would consider I guess my story is dark. from the subject matter is pretty dark, yeah. Anyway, I'm getting off track here. Oh, finishing my thought. I initially did not like the Denny O'Neil comic because I was so used to the question from the Justice League cartoon where he was more of the conspiracy theorist, but it was more lighthearted. So seeing that and just thrown into the cold bathwater of the Denny O'Neil run, it was a shock a little bit. But now that I've gotten more used to darker stuff, it's like, okay, this is probably par for the course. Oh, yeah, that my Next Evolution covers. Yeah, I can see it. I definitely can see that, yeah. All right, let's finish up with what Mr. Moore has to say.
With a local band that we'd put together about 10, 15 years ago now, called The Emperor's of Ice Cream. We had this song called Mr. A. It was the main chorus was a shameless rip-off of Sister Ray by the Velvet Underground. But the verses, I thought they were quite memorable. Would you like me to give you
would we?
A performance,
Come
Jonathan?
on, let's have this. This is gold.
Oh my goodness. Oh my.
He had one room above a thrift store. He had a trunk of books by Ayn Rand. He was short-sighted and reclusive, resisting pleas to take his photograph. He drew a superhero comic. He saw the world in terms of black and white. He said a day's work for a day's pay. That is our one and only right. He takes a card and shades one half of it in dark so he can demonstrate to you just what he means. He says there's black and there is white, and there is wrong and there is right, and there is nothing in between. That's what Mr. A said. Anybody who'd even...
Well, that was an experience. What the hell? I mean, that sounds more like he's talking more about Rorschach. I should have showed that for the Alan Moore episode, because that was such an Alan Moore move of him to just break out into free verse poetry about something that he has kind of a love-hate relationship with.
Committed the merest of crimes, was wandering into this poisonous grey area. They were tainted, and they could only expect the kind of terrible punishment that his Mr. A was likely to mete out to them.
I find it so funny that they put this into the documentary like all of that was a positive thing. That didn't sound very positive. It really sounded like he was ripping on Ditko there. I mean, and I've been critical of the objectivism philosophy too, but it's like, wow, that last minute just really felt a lot more venomful than I don't know if Alan Moore made it out to be like that. That may have just been his sense of humor. Because Alan Moore does have that dark, dry British humor to him. I mean, he is British, so that's to be expected, but okay. Let's go to Strange Brain Parts, video about Ditko. In his own words, Stan Lee and Spider-Man.
Hello and welcome. One of the...
Oh, Ayn Rand? Oh, yeah, Ditko is a very big fan of Ayn Rand. A lot of his objectivist philosophy comes directly from Ayn Rand.
largest losses to anyone with an interest in comic book history was the passing of Steve Ditko in 2018. With him went significant insight into the early days of the comic book industry and his own unique perspective concerning pivotal moments.
I don't know if titling a magazine Amazing Adult Fantasy is the best move. That has a very different interpretation now.
However, Ditko did write a fair amount of essays where he addressed some aspects of his creative process. But these works are not very well documented and very difficult to obtain. Which brings me to the focus of this video. Recently, I was able to acquire The Avenging Mind by Steve Ditko. It was an issue printed in 2008 that primarily contained nothing but written essays. Those essays mainly focused on Stan Lee. In it, Ditko recounts his perspective concerning significant events in Marvel Comics history, such as the creation of Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. It also reveals aspects of the creative process at Marvel during his time there, and, very specifically, his working relationship with Stan Lee. And, well, these essays are quite revealing. Presumably, Ditko decided to write these out as a response to various statements made by Lee throughout the years, and perhaps as a refuting of the credit that was shared with Lee in the Spider-Man movies. It may be that Ditko was morally outraged that Lee was getting widespread recognition for a character that he shaped and designed. After all, Ditko, as a student of the objectivism philosophical movement, would see this crediting of Lee as a moral wrong.
We can't escape her!
Morally, Lee was getting unearned credit. As a student of objectivism, it would be Ditko's responsibility to correct this inaccuracy. Otherwise, if he chose no action, he would be permitting wrongness to continue and proliferate, which makes him as wrong and morally culpable as Stan Lee. Again, that's speculation on my part. I cannot state that's the proper context for why Ditko decided, after 40 years of silence, to add his corrections to Marvel Comics history. It's what makes sense to me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that was the actual motivation on Ditko's part.
And again, we are probably never going to know the true inner workings of Steve Ditko, which is... It's like, again, I get it. He wants to keep his privacy private. But at the same time, it's like, it would have been really neat to actually hear from his own mouth his own thought process.
With that said, I'm going to read one essay titled Creative Crediting. In it, Ditko, like Jack Kirby before him, greatly diminishes Lee's role in the creation of a story. Overall, it's an examination of who deserves credit and how that...
Yeah, Kirby also got shafted with the crediting by a long shot for a while. But unlike Ditko, Kirby has a lot fiery personality. Has a more fiery personality. Blech. Words are escaping me.
Credit should be applied. While this isn't the most blistering essay Ditko wrote about Lee, it's certainly unflattering. For the sake of transparency, this is a slightly edited version of Ditko's essay. Every effort was made not to change the content or context of Ditko's words, but slight edits had to be done for the sake of clarity. and it's simply a practical necessity when one adapts a written essay into a spoken word piece. Now, on with the actual essay.
I mean, yeah, Kyle. Not for being pushed around. I mean, he was about to deadass fight some Nazi supporters when they tried to storm the Marvel offices because of Captain America way back in the day. Like, he was deadass rolling up his sleeves and he was ready to punch somebody. Yeah, tell the Jewish guy why you think Hitler was right. Yeah, that's gonna go over fantastically.
Let's examine Lee's creative crediting method to see who benefits and who loses, how and why it's done, and if it's fair. Lee's crediting method was not in numbers, but in language, using words to conceal, manipulate, distort, or falsify the factual truth. His basic method was subjective and not objective. There's a long list of examples of Lee's creative crediting style. Script, Stan Lee. Art, Steve Ditko. Written by Stan Lee and illustrated by Steve Ditko. Scripted by Stan Lee and plotted and drawn by Steve Ditko. None are consistent in fact and actual meaning, and so all are non-objective and untrue. By using such terms and phrases as scripted by, script and editing by, and written by, in crediting himself, Lee implied or claimed that he had written not a synopsis, but he had actually and factually written a full script. All of these combinations of Stan's credits are all claiming or implying a full script by Lee. In using such terms and phrases as illustrated by, artwork by, and illustrations in crediting me, all of which are factually, truthfully incorrect identifications, Lee is claiming my artwork was done from his full script. Yet, Lee...
Did you guys remember, I forget when I saw this, but I remember being in the art store, and it was a book about illustration, about comic book illustration, and it had Stan fucking Lee on the cover. And it's like, why the hell is he on the cover of an illustration book? He wasn't the artist. He never drew any of the comics. He probably can't even draw a stick figure. Like, why didn't you put, like, Jack Kirby or even Ditko on the cover? Like, learn how to draw like Steve Ditko. Why is Stan Lee on the cover? He was the writer, not the artist.
Never wrote a full script for me. Lee's creative crediting style implied or claimed that I was only following what he fully scripted for every panel, and that I was only just illustrating all his panel ideas, his fully scripted pages/panel ideas, that he had laid out all the necessary detail. It is essential to understand what a full script is and means. A full script contains all the needed panels for every page and all the needed panel descriptions for the type of panel, setting, drama, action, mood, etc. The script has all the panel descriptions, all the dialogue, and sound effects. The script is a complete comic book word story and is only lacking in everything visual. The illustrator's job is to put the script's specific people, places, action, etc. in a composition.
That is one thing I really had to learn myself about comic book script writing. Okay, I'm used to writing short stories and free verse poetry, but comic writing was a whole other beast. Because, yes, you have to write the dialogue, obviously, but you have to write the description of what is going on in each panel. And it's a very odd experience where it's like, okay, I need to write this in a way for my artist to completely understand what is going on in this panel so that he can appropriately illustrate the scene. And honestly, the word balloons are sort of like, once all the art is done, we'll just figure out how to get the word balloons in there. But it's just coordinating how the scene is going to go and describing it perfectly in the way for the illustrator to understand what is going on is a technique in itself. And that is something that I just had to seriously get used to.
Story panel picture. Lee's creative credit, labeling me as an illustrator, was claiming that I worked from his fully written script. He therefore denied me having any role in the actual comic book storyline, any role in deciding how many panels for every page, and the exact story content for every panel. I have no need to supply, decide, or solve any story, drama, or action problem. So I, as an illustrator, was merely following and could only follow from a full script. Lee's creative crediting meant that Lee wrote full scripts and never needed an artist, only an illustrator. His use of the labels illustrator, art, artwork, etc. were arbitrary. A more honest crediting could have been a co-creation by writer Stan Lee and artist Steve Ditko. Lee's crediting style upgraded a 1 to 1.5 page synopsis to the creative credit status of a full script, needing only an illustrator to do the artwork. Lee thereby downgraded the need for a certain kind of artist.
Wasn't the Marvel method where a summary was agreed upon, the artist did some of the art, and the script was then written? Wasn't that the Marvel method? Hold on. Because, Alright, Marvel method was a system adopted by Marvel to produce comics during the 50s. Alright, collaboration approach between writers and artists to create the story. Basically, Stan created an outline for a story, only including the most important elements. So, he technically outed himself all these years, saying, yes, this is a collaboration between the writer and the artist, and still kind of had the gall to be a little weaselly when it came to crediting Ditko. Loose plot, comic artist does the visual storytelling, and Stan fills in the balloons at the end. But still, it's like, yeah, he gives a loose plot, and then the artist just figures out what the fuck to do, and then Stan just fills in the balloons. So it's like, you're already admitting that, yes, the artist is doing some of the storytelling. So yes, Ditko had every right to be pissed that Stan is basically trying to claim all credit in the creation when he himself has been doing a good chunk of the writing. It's just he's doing the writing through a visual mean and not as a literary mean, which is dick move. Still love you, Stan, but that was a dick move.
An authentic full script is where the scriptwriter has solved all the page/panel problems.
This is why I did not believe that whole, oh, Ditko left because he didn't agree with the plot point about the Green Goblin, blah, 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 blah. It's like, okay, that cannot be it. That just can't. And now we're learning more. It's like, oh yeah, that definitely was not it.
Problems is every page contains panels laid out, and every panel has its needed captions, dialogue material, sound effects, and a scene description of who is involved in an action, drama, or setting, and what is going on, and how. The scriptwriter provides all the needed captions and sound effects. He is even giving or suggesting angles, such as close-ups, long shots, or down shots, and even relevant props, mood, etc. Compare a scriptwriter's 20-page script with a synopsis writer's 1 to 1.5 page synopsis. Is anything important missing? An illustrator of a full script illustrates, makes visual what is given in words/writing. The full script writer provides the what and the why. The illustrator provides the how the best he can. The illustrator is relatively passive as to the storyline content of what is going on in the panels. The illustrator's main virtue is his particular art style, of how he designs a panel, does faces and figure work, whether his pen or brush technique has a stylistic or realistic visual effect. With a synopsis, the incomplete storyline material, there is an actual need for more than an illustrator and even more than an artist. A synopsis must have an artist plus. An artist plus has to take what is incomplete, what is partly provided, and add new story ideas, to fill in, expand, provide everything else needed to make a complete whole word/picture story. The Artist Plus has to finish a synopsis writer's work and supply and do much of what a full script writer does to take the 1 to 1.5 page synopsis and expand it into a full page comic book story of 20 pages.
I am too much of a neurotic perfectionist where I could not do that myself. I could not just give out a page synopsis, have someone turn in the art, and then just fill in the word balloons. Like, for me, that's not writing. Like, writing is you plot out the scenes, you pace out the panels, you pace out what's going to happen. So for me, like, that is writing a comic book.
The Artist Plus has to supply rough dialogue for every panel for the writer or dialoguer to polish, to provide better storytelling, continuity, etc. So every illustrator credit for a needed Artist Plus is worse than wrong. It is deliberately denying and rejecting the need, the worth, and the value of the one person who is actually making the abstract written ideas into a picture story. The Artist Plus makes the comic book writer's story idea publishable, makes them able to be bought, seen, read, and enjoyed, and to go into syndication/reprints with all their future benefits or prestige. There has never been a full Spider-Man script by Lee, so no one is entitled to any kind of full script or creator credit, or even any kind of implied full credit. That kind of full credit can only be achieved with creative crediting. And the creative crediting stunt was not done by the front office. Regrettably, the creative crediting was done by the one who was a working story/art partner. A more honest, a more just crediting, showing the actual division of labor used in publishing comics, was needed from the very start. That shortcoming, that error, shows or demonstrates that what is not made explicit is not in conscious control. So whoever has any advantage can try to make the most of it at another's expense. The above should be more than enough to show Lee's creative crediting, claiming, and credit keeping. And it should alert, even convince, others not to accept an authority or a prestige or a claim, but to seek some real, credible proof. If what has been done or is being done wrong is not explored, not exposed, not openly and publicly examined, never to be...
I'm slightly just being distracted by the artwork right now, I'm not gonna lie. Like, this is some pretty cool, trippy artwork here.
acknowledged or corrected, then no proper principle of right and wrong behavior can be known or be possible. Then everyone can become an ignored victim of the seekers of the unearned, the undeserved, of injustice.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's just creative rights and just acknowledgement. At the end of the day, that's what the issue is. And while I don't agree with the objectivist angle to it, I do agree it is kind of crappy to not acknowledge when the artist has made way more contributions to the comic than you're willing to give. That's why Image Comics was created.
That last paragraph really gives off a Mr. A vibe, doesn't it? In other essays, Ditko elaborates a bit more on the points he brings up in this one. Namely, that Lee has only earned credit for putting into action a vague idea that was shaped and created by someone else. Lee's involvement was merely as a facilitator to the actual creator, the creation of Spider-Man being an example.
Oh, that's cool, reading the complete run in black and white. I would want to read it in color, though, because the colors look really, really cool.
The writing of Spider-Man being another example. To clarify that a bit, and to provide a little more context, for an issue of Spider-Man, Lee and Ditko would discuss a plot, or Lee would give Ditko a 1 or 1.5 page synopsis to work from. Ditko would then, entirely on his own, break down the story and draw it. Additionally, he provided, on separate pages, dialogue and captions for Lee to reference, so he knew what was happening in that story. Then Lee would polish the script for publication before sending it off to be lettered. Furthermore, according to Ditko, around issue 15 of Spider-Man, Lee had little or no involvement with plotting the story, and shortly thereafter, they didn't speak at all. So the
That's weird. That is very weird. Again, I am that type where it's like, no, I need to be in control of the story. I need to directly explain what the hell is going on in this story. So that is super weird to not discuss plot details like that. What the heck?
writing credit Lee gave to himself was rather generous and factually erroneous, in Ditko's opinion. All of this naturally...
I mean, if Ditko's account is to be true, then yes, it is very inaccurate.
leads to one important question. Is Ditko a reliable narrator? Despite his approach being one of facts and objectivity, it's difficult not to hear the tempered frustration and disgust in Ditko's words. So there's a level of emotionality in what he's written.
But then we get to like the Kirby situation and the fact that Marvel Comics does not exactly have the best reputation with being nice to its creators, so maybe Ditko's a little bit right here.
Words matter, as the saying goes, and Ditko's word choices and phrasing read very accusatory.
God
However,
damn,
he does
this
make a
art
compelling,
is
if
beautiful.
not somewhat drawn out, argument. Regardless of any conclusions one might come to concerning Ditko's memory of events, or whether his passion or frustration influenced this material, what he has to say should not be discounted. Ditko's version may contradict some areas of long-repeated, rose-colored Marvel history, and that is a worthwhile area of examination, in my opinion. Perhaps the only area of critique that's worth mentioning is Ditko's endpoint, that Stan Lee's numerous claims shouldn't be accepted at face value and then accepted as true. In that, Ditko is correct. However, the only person with an insider perspective on said claims, Ditko himself, was reluctant to speak on the record in any capacity.
Imagine if they did the Doctor Strange movie and they used the visuals from the Ditko comic books. It would probably look a little old-fashioned because this was, the 60s at this point. But it would also look pretty cool in like a retro sense.
So the only actual person who could have supplied a different perspective, who could have corrected Lee's numerous public statements, was entirely silent. Logically, without Ditko's
Which was kind of his own fault, but whatever.
input, it would have been very difficult to challenge Lee's statements without some contradictory evidence as a foundation. Doing otherwise just makes one look like a jerk who uses their baseless opinion to create clickbait content. So, what do you think about this topic? Would you like more from Ditko's point of view? I have to admit, it might be worthwhile to do a video.
It would be retro cool. His characters were made in the 60s. Though I would say that, yeah, they were made in the 60s, so I don't know how well it would work with, especially with CGI, because I don't know how the hell this happened, but CGI has somehow gotten worse after 10 years. How the hell do you do that? You get more technology and somehow the product looks worse. How does that happen? So maybe a Doctor Strange movie with the visuals of Ditko would probably work in animated form more, since it would less like an uncanny, unholy nightmare. I'm kind of curious to see the comment section for this one. Alright, Stan Lee is the Steve Jobs of comics. Oh dear. Last time I was this early, people still was giving Bob Kane credit for Batman. Yeah, Bob. Years ago, before he passed, I had a distinct pleasure of catching Steve Ditko over the phone when he must have been in a chatty mood. Oh, he was in a chatty mood that day. We talked only for close to 10 minutes. And I mostly wanted to ask him about Norman Osborn and the Green Goblin. He answered my question and even elaborated further on other parts. It was a very interesting phone call. Anyone else who has ever had the pleasure of speaking with him knows that you're not supposed to share what he says to you. so I won't be sharing what he said to me as a courtesy to him. That being said, he really did talk like he wrote. I wish he spoke more publicly, but the conversation I had with him reminded me of the famous David Lynch quote, "As soon as you finish a film, people want you to talk about it." And it's, the film is the talking. He wanted his work to speak for itself, and it cannot be stated enough how cruel it is that almost all of his Marvel stuff had Lee writing dialogue over Ditko's work, like a voice taken away. Yeah, that is another aspect of it. Considering that he makes a lot of the same arguments that Kirby did, I'm inclined to believe him. With all the other responsibilities that Lee had at Marvel, it makes sense for the artist to carry most of the load creatively, especially where Jack was concerned. And that is another perspective to have. Like, it would be unfair to expect Stan Lee to be doing all of the writing, because he was not just the face of Marvel, he was also doing a lot of the business and administration side of Marvel Comics. So that's why I still don't have, like, ill will towards Stan Lee. It's just, dude, credit your artists a little bit better. Alright. Ditko's version of events. I feel like Ditko, Kirby, and others were mostly being truthful about Lee. I don't want this whole stream to be a Stan Lee is a douchebag stream, because I do not believe Stan Lee was intentionally trying to be a douchebag. He was a businessman, first and foremost. So, and he was doing all the business stuff at Marvel. So how much do you want to fault him for not being too there for the creative parts? Yeah, Lee was spread thin, and the Marvel method was an economy. Most of the artists had a similar gripes about this method, which, yeah, if it was back in like 2020 where Dan Slott was making this Iron Man comic, and he was boasting about, oh, we're going to do the Marvel method. We're going to write this comic the Marvel method. And me and everyone else who knew about the Marvel method was, the Marvel method is not something to aspire to, dude. The Marvel method was a cost-cutting measure because they had so much crap that they had to get out to the newsstand by the end of the month. The Marvel method is what you do when you're on a time crunch. It is not exactly the method you do to aspire to be. Especially if you want to write a seriously good quality book. The Marvel method was just like a shortcut. And also in that little documentary where he was talking about it, the poor guy who was doing the lettering, he looked so stressed. He's like, I just need the script. I need someone to give me the script so I could put the words on the page. It's like, I don't think you're doing the Marvel method because you want to honor Stan Lee, dude. I think you're doing the Marvel method because you're being a little lazy right now. Yeah, well, I mean, I say shortcut, but again, Lee was spread so thin, he couldn't write the full script, so it's economy method, shortcut, however you want to call it, but the Marvel method was not meant to be a writing method to aspire to. And I remember this video from years ago, which I think this will be the last video we're going to cover, 5 years ago. So you'll probably noticed with both Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, they do these weird like hand gestures when using their powers, and they're using basically the same hand gesture. And this is a video that's talking about the like hand gesture thing.
For a second. You ever notice that Spider-Man and Doctor Strange make similar hand gestures when using their powers? Spidey activates his web shooters by...
You could in theory argue that battle-trained artists like Steve or Kirby didn't need Ditko hands! Yeah, hey Mike! Welcome back! and didn't need a full script because they were so experienced and natural storytellers. I guess you could also make that point too. I guess I'm coming at it from a writer's perspective where it's just like I need to be involved in everything that is going to be happening in this story. So it's not that I don't trust my artist, Martin. It's just me as an artist, I need to be involved in everything that is happening in this story. I cannot physically do the Marvel method myself.
By doing this iconic move, and Doctor Strange casts spells with a nearly identical gesture. Even if you've never noticed it, the characters themselves sure have. The miniseries Spider-Man Fever from 2010 is a bizarre supernatural romp with the two characters, ending in this exchange.
Hey Doc, that thing you do with your fingers when you zap the magic spells? Yeah, that's it. I kind of do that too when I spray my webbing. Strange, huh?
Yes, it is strange.
It's also the same hand sign for I love you in sign language.
Now, those of you who are especially clever may have already figured out that the answer probably has to do with the fact that Spider-Man and Doctor Strange share a similar lineage. Spidey was co-created by Steve Ditko, whereas Doctor Strange was wholly created by Steve Ditko. Ditko was such an incredibly talented and influential comic book artist that I've been struggling for months to try and make a video that encapsulates everything I want to say about his style and legacy.
I'm working on it.
But at the very least, I think it would be fun to go on a little tangent about the interesting and genuinely brilliant way that Steve Ditko drew hands. I'm sure people will like...
If you're doing I guess the creator and writer would want greater input, creative control to give more guidance. Yeah, since it pretty much is just me and Martin, yeah. I can understand if I were working for a company, then things would be different. Fuller script and page breakdowns. Because at the end of the day, it really is just the two of us. I don't have a corporation that I turn a script into when they give it to an artist and a comic book gets farted out.
That? Oh, right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. So I want to start by asking a simple question.
Why are hands so freaking hard to draw?
Because hands!
Seriously, hands are one of the most challenging things to draw convincingly. I was just talking to an artist friend of mine the other day who was lamenting the pains of drawing these dumb things.
Don't even get started with Rob Liefeld about drawing feet!
Hands are incredibly intricate, with the vast number of movements and gestures that they're capable of.
Go! Go! Go, Web, go!
This one tiny...
This is probably the funniest change out of all the Spider-Man movies, the original Spider-Man trilogy. Why the hell did they go with Spider-Man produces the web from his own body? That is a very strange and, when you think about it, very gross change to make to Spider-Man, because that has so many questions. How the hell did he get, like, the web shooting ability straight out of his hands? Where does the web come from? When did he develop, like, this little tube in his hand, like a urethra to shoot the webbing out of? What the hell is going on here? I like the web shooter idea a little bit better because it has less disturbing answers.
Appendage is a complicated system of dozens of moving parts that don't even look like they make sense together. Compared to the rest of the average human body, which is made up of these big, chunky, fairly rigid pieces, hands are an elaborate nightmare, and there's two of them, typically. Plus, your hands are probably the part of your body you see most often in everyday life, not counting your nose, which your brain just kind of filters out until just now when I mentioned it. We're so familiar with our hands that we literally describe how familiar other things are by comparing them to...
Just stick with me, kid. I know this town like the back of my hand. Hey, that's new.
You get it. All of that to say, hands are complicated, and we know them so well that we can recognize instantly when they don't look right in a drawing. So it makes sense that for a lot of superhero action comics, artists would default into drawing fists or simply keeping the hands small and out of the way most of the time. Jack Kirby, for example, was able to effectively communicate the emotion of a scene through the use of other tactics.
The organic approach was more realistic, queasy. Prefer the Ditko web shooters by a teen tech prodigy. Yeah, it's such a baffling change, and they even made a joke about it in Spider-Man Homecoming, where they're like, "What the hell that came out of you?" I don't know. The comic book movies were just in a very weird state. In the early to late 2000s, they were just in a very weird period. Where it's like they kind of knew about the source material, but they didn't really get the source material.
It's like dramatic camera angles, exaggerated body language, and energetic facial expressions. On the other hand, Steve Ditko knew that hands had an untapped potential in the visual language of comics.
Ditko brought his characters to life with his carefully observed drawings of hands. His hands express an actor's sense of gesture, missing in even the greatest of superhero artists, serving just as much to render his characters' emotions as their eyes and mouths. Bill Randall, The Comics Journal.
Or maybe it's just Ditko flexing. But no, it is a very underrated part of his illustrations, because like the hand gestures that both Spider-Man and Doctor Strange do are probably some of the most iconic things that they do. Like Doctor Strange's hand motions, and of course the Spider-Man like web shooter motion. That just goes with the character. That's the only way the web shooters work, and I refuse to accept it any other way.
Hands Steve Ditko drew were incredibly expressive. They were in your face, and often in characters' faces as well. He loved drawing close-up shots stuffed with his thoughtfully crafted hands that would crowd out the faces in the panel. Hell, sometimes he didn't even use faces at all, and solely relied on hands to tell the whole story of a scene. But I'd argue that even when he did draw characters reacting with dynamic facial expressions, the hands that accompanied them sold the emotion of the moment even better. Without these shaking hands in this panel from the story Why Won't They Save Me?, this man here looks more bored than nervous. These wild, expressive fingers from The Last Man on Earth emphasize that this guy isn't just alert, but panicked. Or take this panel from the story Journey's End. This guy here is a murderer on the run who's about to be recognized by a passerby. His facial expression is fine, but it's his hand that really sells the tension for me. He goes from reasonably relaxed in the previous panel to having his fingers rigidly jut out in a tense panic, like he's frozen and trying to decide on his next move, which of course is to violently punch the guy. By the way,
like you do.
These are just 3 minuscule examples from one single comic, so...
Again, amazing adult fantasy, not the best choice of titles!
Yeah, there's a whole sea of Ditko hands out there for you to explore, and I encourage you to do so. J. Jonah Jameson, for example, is a dynamic character whose angry, demanding, prideful, conniving personality can be read entirely through his hand gestures alone. Honestly, I love this guy, but for the sake of this discussion, it might be more helpful to talk about a character who takes up a small, supporting role in a comic that was otherwise clearly centered around the life and times of J. Jonah Jameson. So, let's talk about Spider-Man, I guess. When Spider-Man was introduced in Amazing Fantasy 15, Peter Parker was, of course, bitten on his hand by a radioactive spider that gave him superpowers. The first power he discovered was his ability to cling to walls, shown visually by...
Ditko hands iconic, trademark gestures. And for Kirby, big hands. Big hands, big jaws, big... like, everything. Like, everything about Kirby was very much, like, bold and big.
Highlighting his fingertips, imagery that Ditko loved to repeat throughout the Wall Crawler's adventures. But a spider needs a web, so Peter developed wrist-mounted web shooters that activate with a 2-finger tap to the palm, like so. Wait! Sorry about that. You know,
These web shooters for Spider-Man are kind of awkwardly designed. Like, why did Steve Ditko force Spider-Man to do this hand gestures? There's nothing about that that's inherent to spiders. No, I think he just kind of decided on it by accident.
In Ditko's early Spider-Man stories,
He wanted to flex his artistic prowess.
Sometimes drew the hero using that iconic hand gesture to activate his web shooters. In most shots, however, Ditko drew Spidey only sticking out his thumb and pointer finger. But when you look through enough of Ditko's bibliography, like I have, you'll start to see an interesting phenomenon in the way that he drew pinkies. The more he draws, the farther characters' pinky fingers start to stick out. It begins subtly, but points out more and more. We're so close, we're almost there, and then suddenly, boom! That pinky's out in the open for the world to see.
Hey, that's how you show that you're fancy. Pinky out.
This pinky out pattern appears everywhere in Steve Ditko's artwork. It's like a hidden signature, a little detail of his art that says, Steve Ditko left his mark here.
Here's a scientist doing it for no reason. Here's a businessman grabbing money like this. Here's just some guy knocked on the ground doing Spidey hands. Heck, you can even see it pop up in Spider-Man's origin story before he gets his powers. Oh, and one of Ditko's more political creations called Mr. A, who was an obnoxious character that saw every person and every action in the world as good or evil with no moral gray area, would often strike that finger pose when he dealt out his judgment or threw his calling card at people. Oh, do you get his calling card? It's just black and white. It's so clever.
Yeah, I saw a title from this guy about when he covered Mr. A, and he did not like the darker Spider-Man turn towards the end with Ditko. He preferred the lighter adventures, and he definitely did not like Mr. A at all, which you can tell because he kind of looks like a little bit of a soy boy, but we're not going to talk about that.
Like, was that intentional? Mr. A dealing out his calling card by striking a finger pose that was basically
a Secret Society hand gesture, and people forgot what happened to the Kirby and Lee Spider-Man pages 1 through 6 before Stan turned it over to Ditko. Yeah, I don't know. I honestly don't even... I have no explanation for why Ditko is so fascinated with hand gestures other than he wanted to flex his art skills. Like, this is him flexing.
Steve Ditko's calling card? Did you do this on purpose, Steve?
So Spider-Man going from this to this could have just been an unintended byproduct of Steve Ditko's artistic pinky quirk. But I don't think the same can be said about Doctor Strange, whose every movement drawn by Ditko was incredibly precise and deliberate.
Steve Ditko's arts in early Doctor Strange stories obsessed over hands, about as much as Stephen Strange himself did. Strange's backstory was as a brilliant but egotistical...
I forgot about his backstory. His entire backstory is he was a surgeon who got into an accident and fucked up his hands. Oh no! Hands! Maybe Ditko just had a thing for hands. Like, there's a joke where you can tell if an artist is a boob or butt guy just by his art style, but maybe Ditko was a hand guy. Maybe he just really liked hands. I mean, that's a theory.
And wealth obsessed.
Oh god, he's Ashikari Gagakira. Oh no! That's why he has been so private. It's because he's been murdering people to get their hands. No!
Who relied on the use of his steady, skillful hands. But after a car crash damaged the nerves in his hands beyond repair, Strange gets the news that he'll never be able to perform an operation again. Not content to be any less than the perfect being he saw himself as before the accident, Strange turns to the mystic arts to heal him, but quickly finds a new purpose in life, defending the Earth from magical threats. Now, okay, the first few stories had Doctor Strange mostly fighting using astral projection or some other kind of magic that didn't involve him moving around too much. But after his origin story was told a few issues later and involved that theme of Strange's whole world revolving around his hands, Ditko made the brilliant decision to, from that point forward, draw spellcasting as requiring precise hand choreography. Although, these magical movements that Ditko drew seem to require a lot more finger guns than the Doctor Strange movie incorporated. All the film did was hire an incredibly talented dancer and a stroke of genius to teach Benedict Cumberbatch intricate finger-tutting maneuvers, but that's not good enough! Sign my petition to add more finger guns to the Doctor Strange sequel. I won't rest until Steve Ditko's dream is realized.
In reality, though, Ditko would often furnish Doctor Strange's adventures with mystical elements.
With Doctor Strange, it also could be a reference to rune magic, because there's this thing with like chaos magic and rune magic, depending on how you look at it, where they cast signs, which requires a lot of finger movement too. So maybe that's what Doctor Strange is referencing there.
Elements inspired by real cultures that he'd researched to make sure the world of magic seemed
dang it.
more fleshed out. I'm by no means an expert on the subject, but a follower on Twitter sent me information about mudras, which are spiritual hand and finger gestures used in Hinduism and Buddhism.
Specifically, it seems the Spider-Man-like pose that Doctor Strange strikes resembles the Karana Mudra, which is said to expel demons and remove obstacles like illness.
Wait, hold on, but expel demons and remove illness? That's starting to sound a lot like... So, we're ending where we started, with this little-known comic called Spider-Man Fever.
This 3-issue story involves Spidey getting sprayed with insecticide and succumbing to, you guessed it, a fever, while deliriously stumbling into a bathtub. But it's not just any bathtub, it's Doctor Strange's bathtub. And he accidentally unleashed a bunch of demons recently.
I don't like coincidental storytelling like that.
Who then steal Spider-Man's soul as he lies there helplessly recovering from getting sprayed with bug spray.
That's a stupid premise.
God, I love it when comics escalate into madness immediately. Also, I could be wrong, but this is the only comic I'm aware of where Spider-Man and Doctor Strange comment on how their hand gestures are similar, and it's a story blatantly about Doctor Strange warding off demons and curing Spider-Man of illness, 2 things that the Karana Mudra is used for. That's clever writing on the part of the series author Brendan McCarthy, who also illustrated the story.
You can tell that he was tapping into Ditko's trippy, psychedelic artwork of abstract...
The art style does look pretty cool, and it does reflect the older Ditko style, just with more modern twist.
Otherworldly dimensions, too. The visuals in this comic were meant to evoke Ditko's surreal art, which were massively influential for countless comics creators.
Which brings us back to this panel. The final panel of the series where Spider-Man and Doctor Strange compare their similar hand gestures.
The image in the background of this panel is a classic visual from Strange Tales number 138. While Ditko's entire run on Doctor Strange was immeasurably influential, this image in particular left such an impact on readers that the MCU even recreated it for the movie as a little Easter egg. Putting this iconic Ditko imagery in the background of the panel is meant to showcase the link between Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. Hands that are similar by coincidence but still represent a connected past, tracing back to the hands that created them. We can even see what looks to be the backs of Stan Lee and Steve Ditko as onlookers a few panels earlier. Stan's hand on Ditko's shoulder with his pinky slightly out, as if to pay tribute to the hands of a legendary artist.
Cute tribute.
Hey, Doc. That thing you do with your fingers when you zap the magic spells? Yeah, that's it. I kind of do that too when I spray my webbing. Strange, huh?
Yes, it is strange.
Alright, I think that's a good end point there. Comparing their gestures. That is the hands of the creator, yeah. It is a very sweet tribute, even though the comic does sound kind of stupid. I might check it out someday, just because it does seem like even though the opening premise does sound stupid, it does seem like a very sweet story. But I think on that note, we shall call this stream tonight. If you guys have any creators that you would like me to cover for the next Monday stream, please let me know in the comics or comments. I need to get comics out of my mind for a minute. Alright, let me know down in the comments, or you can find me on X. I still say Twitter. But I am on Twitter at Heather Veely over here. I got a nice little floral icon, and I'll see you all in the next one. Have a good night, everyone. Bye!